That's giving away all the secrets now, I think.
You negotiate with the Crown about treaty settlements.
It can become tense quite often.
We've been there nearly for 16 years now.
It really is that the more that people can come together to find a resolution, it's going to be a lasting resolution, or it has a better chance of it.
Today's episode is sponsored by VXT, the phone system built for law firms. VXT integrates with practice management systems so that when lawyers make calls, their billable time and legal advice can be saved in the right place automatically. 20% of billable time goes unrecorded. A lot of that is phone calls that get forgotten about. Get some of those billables back using VXT. Go to vxt.co.nz or click the link in the description to find out more.
So, Renika, you grew up in a small town in Taranaki called Inglewood. What was it like growing up in a town of just a few thousand people?
Yeah, well, I didn't actually know that it was just a few thousand people, so thanks for that. But I think the best way to describe it is probably safe in a good way. My mum and dad essentially grew up in Inglewood too, and they were both quite active in the community in different ways. So I think as a child, it felt like you knew everyone, or at least everyone knew you. And it meant that you felt safe if you were walking around, if you were out and about at sports. You know, someone was always looking out for you and taking an interest. So I think, for me on reflection, that was really important for me in my upbringing, and important that our tamariki today also feel seen and cared for. And I think that's really what small town New Zealand does for us and what it means to me.
Yeah, there's something special about small towns. I grew up in Martin, which has about 2,000 or 3,000 people. And I just remember going to the supermarket, and then there'll be an old lady come up to me and she'll be like, "Oh, I know you." And I'm like, obviously I have no idea because I met her maybe when I was 5, but she knows my mum and my aunties, and it's very nice just having all the connections in a small place.
I think it's a world where you are attuned and alive to the fact that everybody might know you and might know your parents, and so you're on show and you're always on your best behaviour, or at least that's what I felt like.
Yeah. And do you think growing up in a small town had a big influence on the way that you practice law today, perhaps with a different context that you might have?
Yeah, I'm not sure about the practice of law, but certainly I guess how I operate as a person and in business, in terms of those making connections and seeing the importance of caring about the people around you, or really knowing them in the best way you can, depending on the circumstances. But rather than, I guess, you see people in bigger cities, you can't in a big city be alive to everyone around you and aware of everyone around you, and you almost have to shut it out. I've traveled overseas at times and seen that in the big cities, and you're like, wow, I guess you just have to become accustomed to getting on with life, because you can't say hi to 1,000 people on the street. You can when it's 10.
Yeah, it's interesting comparing overseas and New Zealand. I've just got back from overseas, and when I came home, it was so weird because I'd walk down the street and a random person would say hi, and because I was away for not that long, about 9 months, but it just doesn't happen, and so it was quite surprising, but really nice and welcoming.
Yeah, refreshing.
Yeah. And so after you finished high school, you moved up to Hamilton and you studied a Bachelor of Arts and a Bachelor of Laws at the University of Waikato. What made you want to study law? Was it something you always thought you were going to go into, or how did you end up there?
One of my aunties is a lawyer in Taranaki, and I think seeing her do that was what made me see law as an opportunity. I did take a year off after high school to confirm that was what I wanted to do with my life, and then jump into law school and move away from home in Taranaki. But I think from my auntie, that was how I became interested in it as an idea. And aside from that, I loved public speaking, debating, writing, all of those things that are kind of cliche in terms of people saying, why don't you do law? And I'm pretty methodical, I guess, and logical in how I do things. So it seemed to be the popular choice.
And what did you do in that time off for that year?
Yeah, I lived at home and I worked at Subway. So basically, I just saved up, worked hard, saved up to be able to kind of branch away from home. 3 hours between Taranaki and Waikato is not that long, but at the time it felt like a while.
Do you think that helped with the transition to uni, or how did you find that whole process?
Yeah, I think so. I finished high school when I was still 16, I think. And
Wow.
so I was pretty young, and having a year to just work and probably get a sense of the real world a bit, as contained as it was, did help ahead of then moving away from home, having to find a job and to pay for where we were living, and study at the same time.
Yeah, you must have been very brainy if you were finishing school at 16.
I think that was back in the day when they kind of let you skip classes.
Yeah.
When you were young, if you showed any kind of different skills or abilities. So I don't know that it was, but you kind of just make do with the situation you put in, right? So
Yeah.
didn't know any different.
And so fast forward to now, you specialise in treaty settlements and post-settlement governance advice for iwi groups, as well as tikanga disputes and takutai moana applications. Was Te Ao Māori and the Māori world a big part of your life growing up? And I'll also just ask you maybe to explain some of those terms for some of our international listeners as you answer that.
Yeah, there are a lot of terms in there, but I'll see what I can do. So Te Ao Māori or the Māori world, no, it wasn't a big part of my growing up. My dad's family is Māori, actually from here in the Waikato and Maniapoto areas. But his family had kind of moved away from here and had lost touch a little bit, or parts of it. And my dad's a farmer / block layer, and he got on with the job, and those things just fell by the wayside, I guess. So no, it wasn't. And then moving up here to Waikato, and the law degree as they package it there is a lot about law and context, and Te Ao Māori is a big part of that. And so it helped me reconnect, I think. Then that just flowed on to getting the job at McCall-Lewis, where I was working, where I have been now for almost 16 years. And working in this space just really opened it all up for me to kind of understand more, get my connections and find my places. In terms of working with iwi and hapu, that's about working with at a basic translation level, tribes and sub-tribes, or the different social groupings. But I do work with Māori individuals, whānau or families, right across the spectrum, because the work I do is about tikanga or Māori customs. It's about Te Tiriti o Waitangi, or the Treaty of Waitangi that was signed in 1840 here in New Zealand. And the takutai moana is about our coastal marine area and the tikanga and rights, or customary rights that are associated with that. So there's a lot in it, and you can't really help but feel connected if you weren't before. So I really appreciate that part of my mahi.
That's awesome. And so when you first joined McCall-Lewis, did you have in mind that you wanted to do that specialisation, or did you come in as a grad and think you'll be doing what kind of work when you got there?
When I started, I knew I would be in what was at the time our Māori legal issues team. I had never had in mind that that would be the mahi or the work that I would do, but it wasn't. I didn't want to do it. It was really about, you get through law school, you do the hard yards, you get a job, and you make the most of it.
And so you touched on before, you've been there nearly for 16 years now. What's contributed to you staying there or choosing to stay there for that long?
I'm a really strong believer in that not all workplaces fit all workers, and that you have to find the right culture and fit for you. So what's been that fit for me at McCall-Lewis, I think, is really the people and the values first and foremost. And when I say people, I mean the people that I work with and have worked with over 16 years, because there's a few, as well as the clients. And, we're working with them. We are so involved in some parts of their lives that if you didn't like them or you didn't care about the things that they care about, it would be a really hard and taxing job. I think that's what's resonated with me and kept me here for longer than I want to say out loud, probably.
So working in the multi-legal space, what are some of the key differences that you notice working in this space compared to areas like commercial law or litigation?
That's a really good question. There are a lot of differences and a lot of similarities. I think the similarities are probably easier to say first in the sense that, particularly for us here, the focus is on solving someone's problem and really getting to know them and help them. So that, I think, applies across the board with my colleagues. The differences, I think, is really just that background knowledge and understanding that you need that no one necessarily teaches you at university or in profs, to understand, potentially for some, a whole different worldview, and to understand that there is a system of tikanga or custom that sits there first and foremost as the first law of Aotearoa, and that is first and foremost before the Western legal system. And so combining those two things is absolutely key in our workspace, and it means that every day we are thinking about how to create new law, how to challenge the norms, how to apply things in a context where there's not necessarily precedents or templates or things you can easily roll out. So plenty of challenges and differences in there. And it's a unique and exciting area of law, I think.
Yeah, it's definitely very unique, and I really enjoyed studying a lot of that in my law degree. So your role has developed significantly since being at McCall Lewis, and you've always worked with different multi groups, advising on a range of legal issues. So given the potential for a conflict of interest between these different multi-legal groups, how do you manage this and balance working with iwi groups across the country? And is there any specific challenges that arise from the geographical spread of your work?
Yeah, maybe if I go to the last part of that question first, yes, it can definitely mean time away from home when you're in hearings outside of the area for clients that are in different parts of the motu or the island. So that part of it is the most taxing, especially if you have whānau and friends and things that you need to look after and have obligations towards back home. So that's challenging in terms of managing the conflicts between different groups. It is always a tricky one, and often you'll have clients that you think will not ever have a conflict between one another because they're quite geographically spread. But depending on the kaupapa or the issue that's at hand, a conflict might arise. And so it's just really about, as with all lawyers, I guess, being alive to those things, being upfront about those things and working them through, and really understanding what each of your clients' interests are. You kind of have to understand a little bit more of the background in terms of where they come from, their whakapapa, their actual interests and their history, to understand conflicts as well and identify conflicts, I guess, that on the surface might not be there. So it's tricky, but having a kind of kaupapa Māori approach to things helps in the sense that you can more readily talk it through. Most people get it.
And do you think you have to adapt your approach with the different iwi and hapu that you're working with? Is it quite different for each one?
Yeah, I think that's probably like being a lawyer in any space, that you would slightly adapt your style and approach depending on the client. Obviously, as I said our values at Makoluas are key, and there will be clients that really resonate with those values and want to work with us and like our approach, and some who, don't necessarily dislike it, but another lawyer is a better fit for them. And I absolutely think that's key to our success as a profession. You need different types of lawyers for different things. So while we adopt and adapt different styles for different clients, largely, you're getting the same Renika, you're getting the same team, you know what to expect. But you need to move towards people's different tikanga or different practices as you move clients, I think.
Could you give any examples of how a tikanga-based approach might be used in a legal setting, and how you balance tikanga-based approach with other legal solutions?
Yes, that's giving away all the secrets now, I think. Maybe if I start general and then think of an example, but key to finding a tikanga solution or taking a tikanga approach is first identifying that there is an issue that might have a different outcome. So in any legal situation, obviously, as lawyers, we're trained to go, okay, there could be a claim there and tort. There could be a contractual breach there. But we don't necessarily go, okay, there's a tikanga claim. And so I think that is one example of where, as lawyers, we need to think about, if the context requires it, is there a tikanga lens here? And a good example of that could be, there might be a contractual breach over here, a standard, Western legal course of action. And if those parties are Māori, and if there is whakapapa there, or if it's about land or, particular taonga for Māori, maybe it's not just that there was a contract. Maybe what that contract represents is the agreement that those parties have reached, the meeting of the mind, the sense of ear, a state of ear or kind of balance and settlement, that then a breach of the contract is also a breach of that space of agreement and kind of resolution. So thinking about things through those lenses might open up other causes of action in legal proceedings. But it also goes back to, just in a general sense, let's not just go, hey, here's an employment matter and we'll just tick through the boxes of what to do. If we actually know that's not really a tika or right way to do it, like there's a person at the other end of this, how do we find a way to do both so you don't get in trouble?
That's really great. And have you ever, out of interest, looked into how the law operates in Indigenous spaces overseas? Because I know that New Zealand is quite unique in that sense and a model to a lot of other countries.
Yeah, I haven't in any detailed way, and there are definitely colleagues of mine who have and know much more about it. But yes, in a general sense, the treaty that New Zealand has is quite different to a lot of other countries, in particular, Australia over the ditch. They don't have a treaty that some of these claims and rights are based on or recorded, supported by. So it is different, and you're right, a lot of other countries kind of look to New Zealand to see, well, what are they doing in this Indigenous space or native rights space?
Yeah. And so on the topic of claims, which you just mentioned, you also have a role where you negotiate with the Crown about treaty settlements and surrounding issues. Can you explain in a nutshell what these settlements are and where they came from and the goals of them?
These claims stem from breaches of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the Treaty of Waitangi, which is the agreement that the Crown or the Queen at the time and Māori or Hapu in New Zealand reached in 1840. That treaty effectively confirmed some of the existing rights that Hapu had and made some additional promises or commitments from the Crown. And that is, widely considered one of our founding documents as New Zealand. And so the breaches of that treaty by the Crown then form the basis for settlement negotiations. So in that space, I'll work alongside primarily iwi groups who are negotiating with the Crown for redress to try and right some of those wrongs or provide some compensation for them. That compensation will generally include some monetary portion, a component of properties within their rohe or area, an apology, historical account recording the Crown breaches, and Crown acknowledgements of those. So that's the general context, and the aim, I think, ultimately is to help restore the partnership that was kind of promised or expected from the treaty in 1840, or go some way to rebuilding that.
And how do you navigate balancing achieving justice for the iwi and also maintaining positive relationships with the Crown during negotiations?
It can become tense quite often, and that's nothing to do with the people that are at the table. You know, the people that are at the table for both iwi and for the Crown are faces. They weren't there in 1840. They generally weren't the people that have committed the breaches of the treaty. And so it becomes tense in the sense that often there are things that are just put on the table upfront, honest, trying to reach a resolution, trying to air grievances and ensure that they are heard to then find that pathway forward. So it can be tense, but always, I think, in that positive spirit of trying to find a way forward. And yep, there's a need to maintain relationships in some spaces. And I think it just comes down to a respect thing, a tikanga thing of manaakitanga and looking after one another and going about things in the right way. I don't know that you ever get justice as such, but you've got to start somewhere, I guess.
Yeah. And on a similar note, Takatai Moana claims. These claims involve addressing marine and coastal area rights. Can you provide some insight into the challenges faced by iwi and hapu in this specific area and the legal processes that are currently involved?
Yeah, so I am theoretically mid-hearing at the moment for a Takatai Moana matter, and that's one of two hearings in the High Court that are actually sitting at the moment. There are a number of them across the country, as you can imagine, with the entire coastline of New Zealand being, I guess, at stake. The pathways under what is the Marine and Coastal Area Takatai Moana Act are either Crown negotiation, so similar to treaty settlement negotiation, you engage with the Crown, or you go to the High Court. And essentially what groups are wanting is a recognition of their mana tuku iho and their customary rights in the foreshore and seabed or the coastal marine area. So there's quite a lot that goes into that in terms of proving that either to a minister or to the court. But the challenge, I think, ultimately in all of that is that these are customary rights that Māori had. And I'm not talking about rights to, tell the public that they can't come onto the beach. That's not something that any group can get under this legislation. But the recognition of their customary right is important, and having to get that recognised by a minister or a court is in itself difficult and challenging and confronting, because why are groups that have been here since, for hundreds of years having to go and ask someone to recognise that in a formal sense, and at times have to defend that against third parties who have come in recently and enjoyed the benefit of rights that they will continue to have for the most part after this.
Do you think that there's any misconceptions around these claims that you could elaborate on that maybe the public might have?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of misconceptions around takutā moana applications and what's going on. Certainly, you hear a lot of Māori are trying to take back the foreshore and seabed and stop everyone from going there, stop everyone from going to the beaches, stop people from fishing. And that's not what this is about at all. This is a situation where obviously there is legislation that provides for this to happen. But as I say, it's about the recognition of customary rights. It's not about getting rights or a legal title in the same way that you would have a legal title to your house and be able to stop people at the gate. That's not what happens from this. It's about looking after their taonga and recognising their rights.
Yeah. I feel like there's a lot of misconceptions around a lot of topics in terms of treaty settlements and like the takutā moana claims. And I think people coming through university or school and everything now have a far greater understanding and context to it, which I think is amazing. But it's definitely good to talk about the misconceptions because a lot of the time people just don't understand or hear a perspective of what's actually trying to be achieved by claims like that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Yeah. A lot of it is assumptions, and you know what they say about that.
And so you are also an associate of the Arbitrators and Mediators Institute of New Zealand. How do you see mediation contributing to conflict resolution, especially in Māori contexts, and how do you think it complements legal approaches?
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason that I just recently joined as an associate of AMINS was because of the lack of Māori mediators out there. And I say that, probably I should say legally qualified Māori mediators, because some contexts do require legally trained mediators. So that was why I joined, thinking this is really right up my alley. I am an absolute advocate for people coming together to try, at least, to work out their differences and see if there can be common ground, because our court system is not cheap. Not everybody can afford lawyers and that access to justice that is needed, really, to resolve these matters properly. And the notion of mediation or finding peace between groups absolutely sits well in Te Ao Māori, because I think it really is that the more that people can come together to find a resolution, it's going to be a lasting resolution, or it has a better chance of it. So definitely think it is the way forward. And if you have more Māori mediators and people that understand Te Ao Māori in this space, I think we will get better outcomes as well. Court's obviously needed sometimes, but it's not for everyone.
Yeah, I think it'll be really interesting to see in the future what other areas of law can move to a more informal approach, because just keeping that relationship is just so important, especially if you're going to be having to still continue interacting and having a relationship with these people.
Yeah, and New Zealand's so small, right?
Exactly. You might bump into them on the street.
You are going to see this person at some stage.
And so kind of jumping back a bit now to your role at McCall Lewis. After 10 years, you were promoted to the directorship, and now you are the executive director. Could you walk us through how you progressed through the different roles at the firm and what you think has been important to your success over the years?
Yeah. So started as a law clerk, 15 hours a week while I was studying, and then was admitted in 2009. So after about a year of being part-time at the firm, or as a law clerk at the firm, admitted in 2009, had my son in February 2012, 4 weeks early, I might add, and then came back after a little while, not a year, and was promoted to associate, I think later that year in 2012. And then we had put in place at McCall Lewis, well, the directors before me had put in place a role of managing associate, which was essentially like, we kind of want you to be a director, you're on the pathway, here, get some more information to find out if it's for you and if you're for us. And I can't remember what year that was, but was appointed to managing associate, and then soon after to director. Bit of a change in pace and additional responsibilities and things that come with that, and looking after those around you and the team. And then, whatever date you said, was appointed executive director of the firm, and essentially that is a job that is made much easier because of our awesome chief executive, but it's a job that is really doing all of the director things and then being a sounding board for our CE in terms of strategy and some of the non-legal aspects of firm life. So that made it sound like a really short 16 years.
Time flies quickly.
Yeah, but I think, the key thing, which has probably started with, what my parents always instilled in me, which was just work hard and do your best, give your best to whatever you're doing, was really key. And one of the partners said to me back when I was a solicitor, I think, just put your head down and do the work and it'll pay off. And I kind of thought, okay, trust in that. Turns out it did. But I really think there's certainly not here at McCall Lewis, there's no secret sauce. There's, it's just be a great lawyer, be an awesome person, and do what you need to do, and you'll keep progressing. And I would hope that applies across the board.
Love it. So previously you've been the co-president of the Māori Law Society. What kind of initiatives or changes and policies did you work on when you were there?
Yeah, so I had that kind of role as tūmaki wahine for Te Hongaroa Māori until about August last year, 2023. My main focus in my time was really ensuring comms, I think, because there's been, so much work done over what was 35 years of a volunteer organisation looking after Māori lawyers. And those Māori lawyers are spread across the country, spread across so many work types, that for me, rebuilding some of those communications or continuing, what had been started in terms of our social media and things was important for me. And we have an amazing group of volunteers, not just in the executive, but across the whole hunga that help out with these things. So we had wahine mentoring sessions, toi ora tāne, like a men's health summit, and we had our biggest ever hui a tau or annual conference in Hamilton in August last year, and that was awesome. That was amazing. We had about 500 people, or just under 500 people, attend and hear from wonderful speakers who, again, volunteer their time to present at these things and give back to the kaupapa. So just an absolutely amazing experience, and so glad to have been part of it. But also, after all of that, really glad to pass it on to my friends who are doing wonderful things in other spaces with focus on, law reform and engagement with all that's going on in the world and challenging us as Māori at the moment.
A lot of people at university, they take on extracurriculars.
Yeah, well, especially for tauira Māori or our Māori students in the law, join your Māori Law Students Association and be involved in Te Hongaroa right from when you're a student. It is an association that puts a lot of importance, a lot of weight on including our tauira and bringing them through and keeping them in the law. So I think that's, fundamental. But I would just encourage, in a general sense, any students at law school to be involved in things that can make them visible to the lawyers around them. And that doesn't have to be mooting competitions. Not everybody wants to be standing up making arguments. That's fine. There are a lot of law firms that would really appreciate someone probably just knocking on their door and seeing if they could volunteer a week in the holidays, or being around. And you might not find that opportunity the first time, but I guarantee you, if you come in well dressed, well put together, with a smile on your face and polite and engaging, the people that meet you will remember you in some way. It will come back round the next time. And to be honest, a lot of our law clerk appointments come through, either our involvement at the university and seeing people firsthand, or knowing of people, because there's a lot of lawyers, there's a lot of law students out there, and they all come with great grades, and that's awesome. But are they great people? And for us, culture being so important, that's key. If we know you and we know that you are a really hardworking, awesome person that is kind and cares about people, well, great. Why wouldn't we hire you?
Yeah, that's some great piece of advice. And so you've also been involved in the Rangitane Settlement Negotiations Trust. Practically speaking, what did that role involve?
Yeah, that's casting my mind back a little while. So I wasn't part of the trust itself, but was working alongside them as project manager through my mahi here at Macquarie Lewis. And I really see it as an extension of what we do as lawyers, or probably as junior lawyers as well, just to help manage things through the settlement negotiations. So, engaging directly with the Crown, getting things ready for meetings, kind of the administrative side of things, keeping everything tidy. For really busy people, the clients that we deal with, particularly in the settlement space, often are volunteering their time, and they already have a day job or two and a number of different hats that they're wearing. So making life easy for them, I think, is part of our jobs as lawyers, but it was definitely part of my role as project manager for Rangitane.
Yeah, I feel like that brings in a lot of skills that lawyers may not know they need, about having to have some sort of business acumen, and then the legal and organisation. It's all important.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point that you make. The business of law, as you progress through as a lawyer, is almost as important as the legal skills, because you can be an excellent lawyer in terms of giving legal advice, but if you don't know how that practically translates into a business, then you might be missing a few things and you're not probably helping yourself. And that sounds like it's all about money and everything, but it's not about that at all. It's just the fact that we live in the world we live in. Everybody wants to get paid, and quite, for me, I don't want people to spend more time doing anything than they need to. Life's too short. Everyone's got families, everyone's got friends, hobbies, sports. Like, just don't spend more time than you need to doing work.
Yeah. Great piece of advice for everyone. And so to wrap it up, I have one more question. I want you to imagine it's 2043, 20 years in the future. No, that's 19 years in the future now. Forgot it's 2024. What do you want to have achieved? So I'm handing you an award for your career, and what impact do you want to have made?
I think if we have to talk about what I want to achieve, it really would be creating pathways and opportunities for others to be their best selves, whatever that looks like. That doesn't mean that everyone has to be a director or leading this, that, and the other thing. Helping people in their careers would be a key part of it. And certainly, because of the nature of the work that I do, there are a lot of opportunities to make positive change. I really would like people to be able to say, she helped us make meaningful changes, and not just necessarily for us, but for future generations. That makes me feel warm.
Yeah, even that made me feel warm. I love it. So thank you so much for joining me in this conversation today, Renika. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of File Notes. To keep up with the latest episodes and content, follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube at File Notes Podcast. You can also visit us on our website at vxt.co.nz/podcast/file notes to subscribe to our email list and never miss an episode. That's vxt.co.nz/podcasts/file notes. See you there.